Good morning, girls. We already discussed about the various causes that led to the outbreak of the American Revolution. Today, we'll be discussing about the beginning of the American War of Independence, how the American War of Independence began. The American War of Independence was triggered off by an incident known as the Boston Tea Party. So the American War of Independence was triggered. Trigger means to start as a reaction to something. So this War of Independence, American War of Independence, it began as a reaction to an incident known as the Boston Tea Party. In 1773, the British Parliament passed the Tea Act, which permitted the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies. So the Tea Act, an act named as the Tea Act, was passed by the British Parliament in 1773. Now, according to this act, the main objective of the Tea Act was to help the East India Company, the British East India Company. Now, the British East India Company, it was struggling financially during that time. So, to help this financially struggling East India Company, the act was introduced, the act was passed, and according to this act, the company was given the permission to sell huge amount of tea in the colonies. The colonists demanded that the British government should withdraw the tax on tea. So, the American colonists, they put forward a demand that the government should remove the tax that was imposed on tea. In some cities, the colonists refused to permit the unloading of tea. Now, these tea, they were brought in huge ships. So, in some places, the colonists, the American colonists, they refused to allow the unloading, allow that tea to be unloaded from the ships. Under the guidance of Samuel Adams, a few Americans disguised as porters boarded the ships of East India Company, docked at Boston port, picked up 340 boxes of tea and threw them into the sea. So, some Americans who disguised as porters, disguise means to pretend. So, they pretended to be the porters and they got on the ships of the East India Company, which was docked at Boston port. Now, docked means when a ship comes to the dock, it is known as docked. You can see here in this picture below, this area that you see, this platform is known as the dock. So, when a ship, it comes near a dock, when it is about to come near a dock, the ship is said to be docked. So, this ship, when it was docked at the Boston port, these porters, these Americans who pretended to be the porters, they took about 340 boxes and they threw them into the sea. And all this was done under the guidance of Samuel Adams. Now, Samuel Adams, he was one of the founding fathers of the US. This action was supported by a large section of the public, and all this action, it was supported by the public. The British government, on hearing the news of Boston Tea Party, retaliated by passing a number of coercive acts in 1774 to punish the colonists. So, when the British government, when they heard of this Boston Tea Party, they reacted. They decided to take revenge. Retaliate means to fight back. So, they fought back by passing many acts, many coercive acts, which means many severe or many threatening acts. So, they passed many acts in 1774 in order to punish the colonists. Through these acts, known as the Intolerable Acts, the government closed the port of Boston, reorganized the government of Massachusetts, and allowed troops to be quartered in private homes. These acts, the coercive acts which were passed by the British government, was known as the Intolerable Acts, acts which could not be tolerated. So, under these acts, the Boston port, it was closed. The government closed the Boston port, and also they organized the Massachusetts government. Massachusetts, it's a state in USA. So they reorganized the government there, and also the military troops, they were housed in private homes. These intolerable acts resulted in organized opposition to British policies. So all these acts, all these intolerable acts, they resulted in opposition. People, the Americans, they began to organize themselves and they began to revolt against the British and their policies. As a first reaction, committees of correspondences composed of citizens critical of Britain were established all over the colonies. So the Americans, they began to oppose, they began to revolt in many ways. And the first reaction was the committees of correspondences was formed. Now this, it was an organization where a group of leaders from all the 13 colonies, they formed this committee, and these leaders, they criticized the Britain. They were against the British. In 1774, these committees organized the first Continental Congress in Philadelphia to persuade the British Parliament to restore self-government in the colonies. So the first conference of the committee, it was known as First Continental Congress, and it was organized in Philadelphia. So under this conference, the Americans, they tried to convince the British Parliament that all they wanted was to restore, to re-establish self-government in the colonies, to re-establish, to give them the freedom to rule over themselves. However, the objective of the conference was not to demand complete independence, but only an autonomy in internal affairs. These Americans, these colonists, they did not demand for complete independence. They did not want complete independence, but they only wanted the freedom to take decisions in their internal matters. At the conference, a declaration charter was drafted which included a threat to boycott the use of British goods. So in this conference, a document which is known as the Declaration Charter, this document was written, and under this document, the Americans, they threatened the Britain that they would boycott the use of British goods, which means that they would not buy or use any British goods. Boycott means to abstain from buying or using anything. So they threatened the British government that they would boycott the British goods. The significant contribution of the Congress was the formation of an intercontinental organization which revived the system of commercial boycott. So the main contribution of this Congress was the intercontinental organization, formation of the intercontinental organization. That is the organization which involves two or more continents. So this organization, it revived the system of commercial boycott. It rediscovered the boycott system. The Congress dispersed with a decision to meet again on May 10, 1775. Consequently, the Second Continental Congress met in May 1775. So after the first Congress, after the first conference, the second meeting was held in May 1775. It led the assembly to conduct the government of the colonies. A colonial army and navy were organized, and in April 1775, a fight broke out between the British troops led by Lord Cornwallis and the colonists led by George Washington. So the second conference was in May 1775, and before this, in April 1775, there was a fight between the British troops and the Americans and the colonists. The British troops, they were led by Lord Cornwallis. He was a Governor General of India, and the Americans, the colonists, they were led by George Washington. George Washington, he was the first US president. So the British troops and the colonists, the Americans, they broke out into a fight, and after this, the second conference took place in May 1775. In August 1775, King George III declared the colonies to be in rebellion. So after all these events, in June 1775, King George III, he was the ruler of Britain. He declared that the colonies were in rebellion, the colonies were in protest. So this is how the American Revolution, the American War of Independence broke out. You can see down below, you can see the picture of the Boston Tea Party. This is the Boston Tea Party. This is the ship, and these people, they threw these boxes of tea into the sea. And here you can see picture of George Washington. He was the first US president, and this is Lord Cornwallis. He was the Governor General of America. So that's all for today, girls. Thank you.